Welcome to Tell Me About It, a podcast by SLPs for everybody. My name is Francie.
And my name is Maggie.
And today we are talking about language and communication and how those things are similar and also dissimilar, because I feel like we need to really clarify. To me, language and communication is a very squares and rectangles thing, where all language is communication, but not all communication is language kind of situation. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree with that. The reason that we wanted to talk about this is because something that we'll see and hear a lot, not just online, but also like in real life with other professionals, is that like all behavior is communication. And for me, that's a very like love the sentiment. That is not accurate though. I think that I don't personally think all behavior is communication, but I am happy to explain more about how I would differentiate behavior from a communicative behavior, if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense. To me, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I which means nothing.
We always make sense to each other, though, because we're...
I feel I do have a sticker in my office that has like this kind of sentiment in it, because I do think there's a place for honoring behavior as communication. But again, I don't think that's he's coming. I can hear the little tippy taps. Oh, he's coming.
He's gonna come in and take his daily
schlop.
Daily schlop.
Do you want to go outside, big guy? What's wrong? Okay, we'll see what happens. If he starts whining, we'll know.
Yeah. Sweet buddy.
Anyways, I like the sentiment, but I don't think that's true for necessarily all situations, because sometimes people just be doing stuff and it doesn't necessarily have like a communicative intent. I mean, it's communicating something. It just might not be for communicative purposes, if that makes sense.
Yes. And that's kind of where we get into the difference between communication and language.
Mm-hmm.
And tangential to all of this is the conversation around scope creep between ABA and SLP. So, which I don't think in this episode, we don't really want to talk too much about ABA, applied behavior analysis, just because neither one of us are BCBAs or RBTs, even though we work closely with them. But that is kind of like a piece of this conversation too, and sometimes kind of like the starting point that I'll see this conversation come up online.
Yeah, the people who I hear use that phrase, all behavior is a form of communication, is primarily ABAs and RBTs. That's where I've heard it the most from, just in my own world. But yeah, let's dive into that. What is the difference?
Yeah, so the difference between language and communication, for me, language is a rule-based symbolic system that conveys meaning. So, example, English is a language. It's governed by rules. We have grammatical rules, morphological rules, syntactic rules, and semantic associations that are also kind of like not so much rules, but guidelines that are made up of symbols, which are words. Words are arbitrary collections of sounds that we attach meaning to that communicate a specific message. So that's a language. Communication is conveying a message, but not for me, the difference, I think, is kind of like that rules governed piece of like, we can have nonverbal communication, like facial expressions, gestures, even like things that are even more subtle than that.
Tone of voice, which that's like a sublinguistic cue or whatever, but like,
yes, that can communicate something, but it's not necessarily based in like a measurable, yeah, like or it could be different person to person. It's not as like, it's more open to interpretation. Another thing would be like symbols that aren't rule governed. So things like sign language, like ASL is a language, but gestures are not a language. So like a thumbs up, that has a communicative function, but it's not part of a language because it's communicative, but it's not language. Does that make sense? So very all squares and rectangles, or very squares and rectangles. I would agree with that.
Yeah, communication is the transference of messages between two parties. To me, language is one of the vehicles that can take. And so with communication being our umbrella with that, there can be non-linguistic ways that we communicate. Maggie mentioned a few gestures. This even goes into some of our like eye gaze with like joint attention or referential looking is another one where we're not talking about it, but like if I'm looking at the door, maybe I want to go.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Just a little behind the scenes. We actually started this recording about 45 minutes ago, and my Wi-Fi just cut out all of a sudden for like 15 minutes. And so something that we were talking about before we had to restart was infants communicate through naturalistic communication, crying, looking, laughing, reaching, that kind of thing. But that is not linguistic. Those are things like you were just saying, Francie, like expectant looking, joint attention, shared enjoyment. Those are pre-linguistic skills. And we use them when we have access to language too, but they themselves are not language. It's communication, which is kind of more, it's broader and more nebulous than language. So I really liked how you put that. I would say that communication is an umbrella term and language falls under that. But there are also lots of other things under that umbrella of communication, including behavior. So,
well, and when I think about language too, we have, and we mentioned it slightly, but there is a heavy overlay that we put on top of the words that we use to help convey our meanings with that, whether that's our prosody, whether that's our body language while we're saying this. Sarcasm is a great example because just because your words say one thing, your tone is indicating another, which is an extra linguistic cue on top of just the language that we're using. So like it's super duper complex. Which is part of the reason why I love it is because it's so confusing. Yes, Margaret.
Okay, sorry, the Wi-Fi like blipped again, but I think we're
no. I did not notice any buffering or stuttering on my side, so
okay.
You did not freeze.
Okay, fingers crossed.
I
think I like growled really loud or something, like exasperated sigh, and was like, ah! So anyway,
okay. Where's some wood?
Yeah, knock on. I don't have any around me, just plastic and metal. Okay. So anyway, yes, language and communication, nebulous, kind of hard to define. I think the issue, not like big problem, but the reason that I want to talk about this, at least where this comes in, is saying that all behavior is communication also has its limits. So it's bringing in this kind of like this element of why do we communicate? Why do we use language? Is it always to get something? Is it always with this end goal in mind? Or do sometimes people just do and say things for the simple enjoyment of it, or because it is comfortable, or because it's play? And what is the function, if any, of that?
Which going into, I've mentioned this before, I think on the podcast, but one of my favorite AAC goals for my students who are communicating in alternative and augmentative means is communicative functions, because I think it is so easy to get stuck on the behavior of requesting and protesting, because those are so tangible. But we communicate for a variety of reasons, commenting, I'm trying to think of some others. Gossiping, humor,
Reporting is a big one.
Reporting, yeah. There's so many things that we use language for that cannot be quantified in that like kind of like behavioralist lens, if that makes sense.
It's really, really easy to like binary plus minus requesting and protesting. Those are super easy to take data on. They're some of the earlier communicative functions, but they're not super social. They're not very, I mean, yes, you are talking to somebody else, but it is with a clear end in mind. Commenting, reporting, these things like the primary function in my mind is more social. It's like I'm looking to connect with you over this topic, something that we're both seeing or something that I'm seeing that you haven't seen yet, but I want to bring your attention to it. That's reporting, right? So, and that's a little bit trickier. That's a little bit harder to take like hard data on. And so I think that's maybe why it gets overlooked. And sometimes people don't see the usefulness of that, especially for kids that need a lot of things and need to be able to request and self-advocate in that way. So
this has me thinking about Pod again, because of course it does. Because Pod has built-in communicative functions with like, I'm telling you something, it's already happened. Like, anyways, I love AAC. That's just where my brain kind of like rests at most of the time. I digress. One of the conversations that we were having before
my Wi-Fi cut out.
before Wi-Fi decided to like hang out and just leave.
Yeah.
But was talking about the function of play. But one of the things that I appreciate about our conversation prior was that it was not the function of play for children, but for adults.
Yeah, the function of play for adults, like how somewhere along the line, as you grow up, you just stop playing and like playing in the way that we did when we were kids of like, you have a friend over, no agenda, and you just make stuff up. Like you just play pretend. At least that's what I did a lot with my friends. We would play Barbies, or we would play house, or we would play whatever. I had this whole like fantasy world with my next door neighbor where we would pretend to be centaurs, and we did that for like years.
Margaret. That's awesome.
Yeah. And like, yeah, we had these like very intricate imaginary worlds. And yeah, we just like now when I have friends over, I don't say like, hey, you want to come over and play? Unless we're having like a game night, which does happen. Or like you and I, we both play D&D with some of our grown-up friends, and how that is so different and refreshing because it's kind of like taking us back to that imaginative play of childhood where like there isn't really a function for this other than to play and to just enjoy being around each other.
And we got on this topic previously because you had been watching like a nature informational video or something.
Yeah.
Will you speak to that?
Yeah, it was a reel that my husband showed me that made me think about this. And I knew that we might be talking about this on the podcast today. And so I kind of made that connection in my brain. But my husband showed me a reel yesterday of someone talking about play behavior in animals, and not just animals that we consider to be like similar to us as humans, like not just like monkeys or other mammals, but also like dolphins and birds and animals that we don't see as similar to us also exhibit play behavior. Dolphins make these like bubble rings with their blowholes, and they'll like swim through them and like pop them with their snouts and play with them in a way that doesn't have a clear behavioral function other than they seem to like it. Another example from the reel was a certain type of bird likes to like rub ants all over themselves for no apparent reason other than they seem to enjoy it. So I don't know, maybe it's like itchy or something and they enjoy that. I don't know. But the point that they made was if an animal is exhibiting a behavior that doesn't have a clear function and they are relaxed, it's probably a play behavior. So like they're not under stress, they're not under like duress or anything. They're relaxed, they're just chilling, and then they start doing something that like doesn't seem to serve any particular purpose. They're probably playing. And I think that that rings true for humans as well. And like we spend so much time around children, sometimes they're just doing that. Like sometimes other professionals will be like, what do you think they're trying to communicate with this behavior? Like, what do you think they're doing that for? And I'm like, honestly, I think they're just doing it. I think they just like it. So,
And that's okay. And
and that's
okay. And I
okay.
think that's the main message of this episode is that like sometimes there's not this beautiful, elaborate reason for why people are doing things. And that's okay. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually just kind of went through, I was writing a report recently for a student I did an evaluation on. And in the report, kind of put some information about echolalia, like delayed and immediate echolalia, where, and I think that this is one area or one topic that I've seen, I think communication almost be over applied. And I think that it is an overcorrection because in the past, echolalia was taught to therapists as like non-communicative entirely. Like it's just this kind of like compulsive stereotypy. It's not communicative. Don't read too much into it. Then we began to kind of uncover like, no, echolalia can be very communicative. It can have this intent behind it. So we should be paying attention to it and we shouldn't be trying to like eliminate or suppress it. But I think that a lot of people will.
Sorry, the Wi-Fi.
No.
Okay, we're good. We're good.
Okay,
we're good.
I didn't see any freezing.
Okay, good.
Time,
That's
so.
okay. We're good. We're good. We're making it. This podcast is about survival. Okay, adapt, improvise, overcome.
Adapt, improvise, overcome. But anyway, not all echolalia is strictly communicative. It can serve a purpose, which might be regulating, or it might even just be like kind of like having a song stuck in your head. You just have this desire, this impulse to sing it because it's stuck in your head. You're thinking about it. Echolalia can be similar, where it's not necessarily communicating a message. It's not linguistic. It's just for fun. Like they're just doing that. And that's okay too, you know? So it takes a lot of, I think, discernment sometimes, and sometimes some trial and error too, to figure out the difference between echolalia that is communicative, echolalia that is linguistic, and echolalia that is just for funsies. So I don't know. Have you experienced that too, or do you have different thoughts or feelings, Fran?
I was just getting ready to go off on a tangent about how oftentimes you can have communication that's not language, but I feel like you can also have language that's not communication. And if you've ever like interacted, like I'm thinking about like a Wernicke's aphasia situation where like we have all of these words and yet we're still not communicating, if that makes sense. And so I was just pondering like the inverse of what we were talking about specifically in the presence of like an aphasia situation. Once again, going on the disclaimer, I'm a pediatric therapist. I have no business talking about aphasia.
We don't deal with aphasia pretty much ever.
But that's kind of what this, I don't know. I was just kind of milling on that, or like I had a student with a TBI. I keep bumping my microphone.
That's what I was going to bring up, TBI or cognitive impairment, where you can have language that's kind of empty. But you go ahead and continue your
that's the empty was where I was going with that, where we have a lot of words coming out and we're sending them to a receiver, but like the mine cart of language is like empty. And so like the message is just like it's hard to discern, it's hard to kind of parse through. And so that's kind of what I was thinking about too, with when it comes to language therapy. Sometimes we're on the one end where we're trying to teach language as communication, and sometimes we're on the other end of teaching communication as language. And so for individuals for whom they have language, but it's sometimes I don't want to say meaningless because it's never meaningless in like the moral sense, but like if their language is empty, then we have to help ascribe meaning. And so that's where that side of therapy comes in. And anyways, that's kind of where I don't know if that made any sense, but that's where I'm like, that's the cud that I'm chewing over here in my cow brain. So
for sure, cow brain. I think it makes sense to me because I know what you're talking about, and I'm trying to think of a way to explain it in like almost a particular example even. So, and it is kind of hard to describe if you haven't had a conversation with someone that is doing this. So like someone that has had a brain injury. Usually like right-sided TBI will be where you'll see this, or someone with a cognitive impairment where they are, or an intellectual disability. I'm sorry if we just did a whole episode on intellectual disability, and I still use those two terms kind of interchangeably, and I don't know if I should or not. So I should educate myself. But anyway, intellectual disability, so sorry. Where it'll be like, it almost feels like they are saying something to you that they've heard before, and they're using it in the appropriate context. So like if they're trying to tell you a story, they'll go, oh, well, last night we were all home and we were waiting around. We all ate dinner together, and it was like my mom put the food on our plates, and she said, you guys better eat all of this dinner. And we were eating dinner together, and we had some food and we were eating. And so it's just that kind of like maze, like you're not getting a ton of information out of it, but
they're using a lot of language to get that point across. And so yeah, mazy is a really good way, or like it's very like
very amazing. And so it's kind of like, and in experiences that I've had where I'm talking to a student that's doing this, where they are like a child, I'm like, okay, we're talking about dinner. You brought that point up independently. I feel like there's something, you want to tell me something about dinner and you're having a really hard time getting to the point. So then I would ask, maybe follow-up questions, kind of try to narrow it down. Like, oh, well, was it a new food at dinner? Or why did mom want you to eat all of it? Do you not finish your food sometimes? Or like try and kind of narrow it down, whittle it down to the heart of it. Cause it's, sometimes it'll be like a lot of talking around it. But that is, I've never really categorized it in my mind as language without communication, but I think that fits. Like, I think that's a really good way to describe it.
Yeah, where you're saying much without saying a lot, if that makes sense. Or you're saying a lot without saying much.
Yes.
And I like, unless you've experienced it firsthand, I'm having a really hard time communicating what that's like to be in that situation where you're really focusing hard. And I've had this happen, actually, now that I'm thinking about this, I've had this happen with other students who their like primary diagnosis was like ADHD, and like they've lost the train of thought, but they're still talking, and now we're on a different thought and I'm lost.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh man. Where you start in point A, story is being told, there's verbal language is coming out of their mouths to get to point B, and then you never get to point B.
And the thing is, and I think the reason why it's still language is because they're following the grammatical rules.
Yes.
They're using the right words and they're putting it in the right structure, but it's empty. And it's like, it doesn't, and by that, I just mean like the meaning. So if communication is a message being passed between two parties, that message is not being passed. So
and that message is not being passed due to communication breakdown. That message is not being passed because it simply doesn't exist.
Yeah. Or it's so
hard to access.
It's so hard to access. I think that's it. That's so
a much more
difficult to access.
That's a much more appropriate way to frame that, which is, that message is so hard to access that it is not being transferred through linguistic means. Yeah, I've been meaning to, like, when I have these interactions, write them down, because then I'll be in IEP meetings or situations like this where I'm trying to explain it to another person and they're like, what? So they use the word thing a lot. And I'm like, no, it's more than that.
It's more than that. Yeah. And I think that it's hard for us to give an example, because much like once you know how to read, you can't not read a series. Like, you can't not read a word. If you see it, you read it. And with language, if you have typically developing language and you understand and can use language communicatively, it's really hard to force yourself not to do that. So it's difficult to give an example of something that is disordered language. So something else I just kind of thought of in this vein is And this I think applies more to the autistic population. A lot of autistic people have language disorders. And I think that kind of sounds like, well, duh, like a no-brainer. We know that this occurs often, co-occurs often with autism. But this conflation between language and communication and then conflation between behavior and communication, I think has kind of led some people to think like, oh, it's not a communication disorder. There's no breakdown. It's a difference. And so there's always going to be a reason behind something. And the reason, or like the behavior, the communication, whatever, can always be mapped onto a linguistic meaning because it's a language difference. And that is where I would say, not so fast. I don't think so. Language disorders do exist. There is and a disorder would be like an incorrect, because again, language is rule-based, not incorrect in like a moral way, but incorrect in breaking the rules, not learning the rules effectively. It is that like incorrect learning and use of language. So that's another kind of where I'm like, yes, but no. Does that make sense?
The yes, but no, but yes is exactly how I feel about this whole conversation, where I'm like, yes, language and communication do go hand in hand. No, they are not the same thing, but yes, they have a lot of overlap. And so with that, when it comes to specifically your point about autism and language, yes, language disorders and having abnormal characteristics of language is a diagnostic criteria for autism. No, that does not mean that every autistic person is non-speaking. Like that difference in language can be different, but like, yes, there is a difference there, if that makes sense. Yes, but no, but yes, oftentimes. And so
yes, but no, but yes. Yeah, and I think that categorizing something as strictly a difference when it is disabling to an individual is not fair. It's go ahead.
I actually just did a PD on this yesterday about it was specifically in the context of dialect and English language learners in DLD. And the hallmark for them about a difference versus a disorder is the presence of rule-based things. If is the grammatical errors that they're making, quote unquote errors, loose air quotes, a rule-based error, because if it's a dialect, regardless of the dialect, it's still going to have obligatory syntax and it's still going to have rules that it adheres to. If it's an English language learner, is the presentation of their language commensurate with peers who have had the same amount of second language exposure? Their language development as English language learners oftentimes follows a set kind of path, if that makes sense, with social language coming first before academic language develops. And so with that, the difference is it's still rule-based. The disorder part comes in when it is disabling and also not following a set of rules that we would expect to see. And so that to me is where the difference comes in at between a difference and a disorder is it adhering to a set of rules, and also is it disabling and also not rule-based? Because learning, like if I got dropped into a country where I didn't know the language, I would be truly kind of disabled at that point. However, the path that I'd get to learning that language would most likely follow a typical path, if that makes sense. So like rule-based, but causing issues, not rule-based, also causing issues, different things. And I think where our role as an SLP comes in so importantly is because we have the clinical knowledge to help kind of parse through that disorder versus difference issue, if that makes sense. Because in the schools, I will sometimes get a kid on my caseload where they're like, hey, this kid is demonstrating issues with reading and writing and these things. And like, that's the path that I follow to kind of parse through the difference versus disorder. Because the issue is that they're struggling to learn, but is that issue coming from a difference versus a disorder? That was a big tangent, but
yeah. I think an example I would give to kind of like boil down what you're getting at here is like if an English language learner their native language is in their native language does not contain articles. So like a and the. English does contain articles. We would say like I'm going to the store. If they produce the sentence I'm going to store, that in English for a native English speaker is incorrect. And it is incorrect in English, but because that is a like transference from their L1, their native language, I would be more willing to think this is a difference. This is a dialectical difference, not a dialectical. It's a result of their native language. And if it is not disabling, I would say this is not an SLP problem. Like this is not an SLP thing. This is a English as a second language thing. So I wouldn't say this kid needs speech therapy. I would say this kid needs someone to teach them the rule that in English we say the, a and the, and teach the rules behind that. So that's kind of like, and if you have enough of those types of errors, it can really impact your ability to communicate with an English speaker. Buddy, usually Diamond's the one getting all upset.
I know. I'm thinking the neighbor's getting an Amazon delivery home, please.
Well, how dare they? But anyway, yeah, if you have like enough of those differences, it can be really detrimental to a person's ability to communicate effectively with other English speakers, even if it's not disordered. Like something can be ineffective and also not disordered. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of like nuance here between all of these different topics that we're touching on: language, communication, behavior, dialect, differences, disorders. Like there's lots of little ticky-tacky, same but different type of
It's very twisty-turny. It's very splitting hairs sometimes when it comes to language, but I feel like as the SLP, that's our job, is to really get in and like split those hairs of the nitty-gritty of language and communication.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, I think that culturally, maybe about 10, 15 years ago, we tried to move away from calling things a disorder or a disability. And I still do see some of that is leaning more into the idea that there are different neurotypes and different abilities. So like instead of saying disabled, someone might say differently abled. Or I have seen a push online to move away from calling autism spectrum disorder, calling it just autism or a different neurotype or something like that, which I think that we're going the other way in it feels like an overcorrection of saying like, okay, well then we're missing this whole element where these things are disabling. Like there is a disordered element here where it has deviated so far from what is expected that the person is having a really hard time functioning. And even though some of that is social, yes, like it's because we live in a social construct, we still live in the social construct, and so it's kind of like we have to go yes but no but yes.
I was just about to wrap that up by saying yet another yes but no but yes situation.
Yeah. And that, like, my whole point in saying that is that in my mind, saying disabled, saying disorder, I'm not saying bad, wrong, or evil. I'm just saying disabled and disordered. Those things are not moral statements. So yeah.
And when we have the understanding that disorder and disability are not dirty words, I think that allows us to have more effective treatment planning for the people that we interact with, when you remove that kind of moral piece to it. Because ultimately, if I have a student for whom they are not using language, but they're using communication, I'm still going to teach them.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. And then the inverse, if I have a student who's using language, but maybe not in a way that is communicative, as we mentioned earlier, I'm still gonna teach them.
Yes. Yeah, and those treatment approaches are very, very different. So we cannot, if a kid is using, if they are communicating, but they're not using language, we have to teach the language, right? Like we have to, that's why our job exists as speech language pathologists. Like we're going in and we're doing that therapeutic piece. On the flip side, if a child is using language, but they're not really communicating much with that, then it's our job to teach that communicative repair. And it's our job to add communication back into that language, which ultimately, I mean, that is very indicative of a language disorder. So this is where we're getting into that like very ticky-tacky semantic game here, which is so fun and not confusing at all. But yeah, so I think that it can get, when we see this kind of like scope creep of like, especially like ABA saying like, oh, well, we treat language too, and we can work on communication too. I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like you are totally doing some, and that's great because I want to see communication supported by all professionals. So I love that. But like this is so specific and so nuanced. And like this is our whole gig. Like this is the only thing that we do as a specialty. So it's kind of like a like, hey, don't even like overburden yourself with that. You worry about you worry about your stuff and we'll worry about this. And yeah, we work together, we hold hands, and I love that. I love working with BCBAs and RBTs. But yeah, that I think that's why you can see some SLPs getting really territorial about it.
Beautifully said. I think the gist of this episode and kind of the gist that I'm coming to is that language and communication are very different, and neither one of them can be boiled down to just a behavior, if that makes sense.
Yes, behaviorism absolutely has its limits as a theory, but we also can't get rid of it completely because it does explain.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you gotta give her flowers. She's been around for a long time and she does explain a lot, but she does have her limits. And with that, going into the nuances that exist between language and communication and trying to boil those down to simply a behavior really misses out on the whole picture of how beautiful both of those things can be. So there's my 2 cents.
No, totally. And like, yeah, we can't totally get rid of it either because a lot of language and communication is behaviorally motivated. It is behavioral. Especially like, I don't know, that kind of early communicative function things, like teaching kids this is how you communicate with those around you. These are the rules that we use. So it absolutely is a part of it, but it's not the whole story. But it's neither is, some of the other kind of like language and cognitive theories of natural language acquisition. And I don't know, there's flaws to every theory, which is why there's like a million of them. So, but yeah, it's definitely, I feel like this episode, we might listen back to it and be like, dang, that was really confusing. And we kind of just rambled for like 45 minutes.
Yeah, full transparency. We came in with no outline. We were just like, let's just go off the rip. We'll see if that comes back to bite us. But I don't know. I feel like through our rambles, I have at least better established why I feel that language and communication are different. In that very squares and rectangles-y way. And in order to best address disorders of both, you have to know the difference because they're different. And so
yeah, we're big fans of nuance here on the pod. We love to split a hair.
There's not a hair I won't split. What are you talking about?
There's not a hair I won't split. And so but we also we exist in our real lives, doing real therapy with real people, and like it's a lot easier to engage someone in a really nuanced discussion when you're coming from the same place, like when you're coming from the same stance, I guess. And online in the social internet doesn't do nuanced stances very well at all. Hot takes drive engagement. There are a lot of like trendy things that drive engagement and views and get you really far. So I think that I would just caution other SLPs to say like, yes, it's totally awesome to agree with things like all behavior is communication. That's fine, but we also have to be conscious of what that may be communicating to other people who don't have the level of nuance and specificity with those terms that we do. Through no fault of their own, just that we've spent 6 years and then also our entire careers focusing on the difference between these terms. So, yeah.
This has also made me, I might cut this. This has made me think tangentially about language also being kind of a living creature, and how it changes rapidly with cultures and influence, and how that cannot be quantified for the purposes of AI. We'll get there later. But I heard a linguist, etymology nerd, whose name I never remember. I think his first name is Alec.
Etymology nerd.
Yes.
Etymology nerd.
Yes. Discussing how it is almost impossible to quantify language down to bits of data for the purposes of AI because it is always dynamic. And I think that really, once again, speaks to the beauty of speech language pathology, because you have to have a human brain to be able to interpret the nuance for that. And as people who teach language, I think there's a lot to celebrate in that inability to quantify, if that makes sense. And so I think that goes kind of hand in hand with what we've been saying about all of this, in that it's so heavily nuanced and it's always changing languages. And so anyways, that's the next thing that kind of popped off in my brain. So
yes, very dynamic. I just thought of another example of something that's linguistic but not communicative is the do colorless green ideas dream furiously. Have you heard that sentence before?
No. Okay.
This was taught to us in grad school, I think, to make a syntactic point of like, you can put, that is a grammatical sentence in English. Do colorless green ideas dream furiously is a grammatical English sentence. It does not make sense. It carries no meaning. Because, and it in fact has some pretty blatant like errors in it. Like something can't be green and colorless. Something can't dream furiously. Like that's not what those words mean. So it's grammatical, it's linguistically a-okay, but it communicates nothing. It doesn't mean anything. So, but I think, like, thinking about AI, if language was strictly about rules that we can write down and follow with 100% adherence, then AI would be able to emulate English really well. And it does emulate English really well.
But it requires so much programming on regular frequency to keep up with the changes.
Yeah. Especially with English, which is more fluid and dynamic than other languages. We can make up words in English really easily. We can add new words to our vocabularies. Meanings are kind of more fluid. And now, especially with the social internet, things change really fast. Slang changes more quickly than it ever has before. And so it's really hard for a machine to keep up with that. Yeah, low-key, me and Francie are kind of both AI haters. I'm going
to say it with my chest. I hate it.
I hate it too.
And you know what? I saw an Instagram reel with a comedian like discussing something relevant to this. And they're like, well, why are you so against it? And their response was, because I think something waits in the divine for me for like resisting. And that's how I feel about it at this point. Like, I'm not doing this on premise.
The audio I think is like, why don't you have a podcast? Because I think a reward waits for me in
divine.
And yeah, it's like, why don't you use ChatGPT? It's like, because I just hate it. I just hate it. I think
I
that,
do.
oh gosh, yeah. But you know what? This episode is not about AI. We should probably do an episode about
I
it.
would love to do an episode about AI because I
I
do hate it.
yeah.
And from a language standpoint, I think it's really fascinating, and I would love to
It
um,
is because
dive into
ultimately,
that.
like, what
Well,
ChatGPT and Grok and Claude and all of those AI models is a language learning model, right?
yeah,
LLM, isn't that?
yeah, yeah, and they have people training, like, their whole job is to code language for them to learn. Anyways,
Yeah.
I digress.
And so like what it is basically like a really good rules
Learner.
machine. Like rule
Mhm,
learner, rules machine and a word guesser. It's a really good
mhm.
word guesser.
But one of the fascinating thing I'm getting on a tangent. I'm
Let's
so
finish this
sorry.
and then
And
let's
then we're gonna
record
start
a
a new
bonus episode about AI.
Okay, with that,
Stay tuned for me and Francie rant about AI for 45 minutes.
catch us next time.
Next up on Tell Me About It. Anyway, this has been Tell Me About It. Thank you so much for listening. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify under Tell Me About It and SLP Podcasts, and you can follow us on Instagram at Tell Me About It SLP. We will see you next time when we rant about AI, probably. Okay, bye.
Bye.